Find insight, guidance, and answers. Tune into Spirit with radio medium Laura Lee.
Laura Lee here. Have I got a show for you today? I'd like to welcome my special guest author, In Love, Dad, How My Father Died and Then Told Me He Didn't. His story was profiled on the Netflix series Surviving Death. Hello, Mr. Mike Anthony.
Hi, Laura Lee. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I so appreciate you taking the time out and sharing with us about connecting with your father once he crossed over.
Yeah, I'm an actor and a bartender, and I sort of have this varied life. But before I did all of that, I was going to be a high school science teacher. And, science is very clear on what they believe about life after death, in that there is no such thing, right? That's what the mainstream science has to say. But when my dad died, things began to happen that I certainly could not explain, and that science, I believe, cannot explain. And then things eventually happened that completely upended my sense of reality. And I now know without a doubt that science simply has a whole lot left to learn.
Yes, they do. So what was leading up to it until you finally had the connection with your dad? I'm curious.
Well, what happened is mediumship, which of course you and your listeners are familiar with, was something that I was vaguely aware of from the show Crossing Over with John Edward, which was popular, when I was in high school. But I assumed that if there was anyone walking around the planet who could truly talk to dead people, surely one of my science teachers would have told me about that, if there was actual evidence for it. So I assumed there couldn't be a whole lot to it. But when my dad died, in our situation, unlike the typical process, mediumship sort of fell into our lives when a complete stranger, a woman who was a medium who had never met my family or I, started to get messages from my father. And she ended up contacting us to let us know that she had this guy, this spirit, this person out of body talking to her who was not going to stop. He was not going to let up until his family knew he was okay. And so that's how mediumship sort of just came splashing into our lives.
So it wasn't a personal experience until she actually came to you with the information, correct?
Yeah. I mean, we were having some things happen that I would call signs now I believe 100% were actually my dad.
What were those? Because I'm always talking about the signs to my audience too.
Yeah, one of the first ones that was incredible, my sister and I found this little scrap piece of paper in my dad's house with the words, "Believe," a country song, and then another scrap piece of paper that said, "Tell Jen." Jen is my sister's name. So we realized my dad must have heard this song on the radio at one point and forgot to tell her about it. So the next day, my mom is deciding to have a playlist ready for the wake. She wanted to have some music playing. So I said, look in iTunes and try to find what that song is. Turns out it's a Brooks and Dunn song about life after death. It's about a guy who believes that life goes on after death. We couldn't believe it. How many popular songs are about that subject, right? So that was incredible enough. The week after the funeral, I was driving back to New York, and for the first time I was alone, and I was devastated. I was crushed, thinking I'm not going to be able to call my dad again.
Right.
I have the radio on in the background, which I never did. I always listened to my own music. On that day, didn't have the energy to plug the phone in. Heard these words. I couldn't believe it. I go to turn the radio up. I'm actually afraid to do that because if I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing, I'm thinking, I'm not going to be able to keep control of my car. Sure enough, it's that song on the radio.
Right.
And I called my sister screaming, "Listen to this." So things of that nature started to happen almost immediately.
So tell us about the medium and what really transformed you into really believing this with your dad.
Yeah, after that medium contacted us, she was not a professional medium. She was someone who did that as a hobby. My sister, after that happened to hear the segment on a radio station with a woman calling herself a professional here in Connecticut. So she contacted her. And what really started to change my mind on things was when she came to do a reading for us, I tested her by setting up a little code word with my dad. I said, "Okay, Dad, if this is real, I need you to mention this very particular thing." And at the end of that reading that night, as we were wrapping up to leave, she looked directly at me. There were 7 people there. She looked right at me and said, "Your dad wants to," and then she delivered exactly my code word. So that was the thing that really sort of
confirmed it
made
for
me
you.
Start to think that there could be something to this. Yeah.
Right. Incredible. Glad to hear that. And so now do you make those connections with your father on a regular basis? Without a medium or with a medium?
Without a medium, daily. I'll be driving in my car, and I'm actually surprised if I reach over and I don't feel this physical shoulder there. I mean, that's how much I feel him around me.
It's your mother and your sister, right? Are they connecting with him as much as you are?
100%. Yeah. Very lucky that my family has been along for this whole ride with me, very involved. And so they have seen this with their own eyes. And my mom has had direct experiences too. Not long after he died, my mom heard my father say her name as though he was standing
there,
you know.
She could hear it out loud, correct?
Out loud. Like that if I were there, I would have heard it too. That's what she said. Yeah.
I love it. I wish we had more time for you. We're going to have you back. If you could share with our audience where they can find your book.
Sure. The books are on Amazon.com and the website is MikeAnthony.com.
Wonderful. It was a pleasure, Mike, for having you on the show today. And if you would like to be a special guest caller for a reading, sign up at Radio Medium. Laura Lee, as always, I'd love to hear from you.